Hello, everybody. It's 1:30, so it's probably time I should at least start talking. My name is Marcus Williams. I work on Intel's OpenDaylight SDN team. And I'm going to talk about OpenDaylight S3P today, which is basically scale, security, stability, and performance. It wasn't until about a week ago that I planned on doing this based on a few people's gentle persuasion. And so what I planned, and it might be a little bit misleading because of what the session talks about, but I don't plan on going through a bunch of results. In fact, some of the results I would do, OVSDB results, I'm sure some of those guys want to hear some numbers there. Not quite finished yet. But there are some results that are in OpenDaylight CI that we all sort of know about. We've done a lot of testing and improving our testing over the last, I guess, 6 months since the last release. However, I want to have a conversation more on where we're going in the community as far as S3P, sort of what we want to do, and I have a bunch of ideas that I'd like to have some discussion on. So I'll go ahead and get started here, but that's basically where I'm at. So these are some proposed sort of goals for for the community. First is like a work group. We've talked about this in integration tests quite a bit, but the idea that we would come together and not just people who are doing test work, because there's a very small portion of people who are in the test group and who are actually doing the work, but we actually need the community as a whole to sort of fill in some of the gaps as far as coming in and helping decide what needs to be tested, and possibly helping define tests and actually create the tests themselves. But I think we need to create sort of a work group where we meet every other week or something along those lines where we talk about these issues that I'm going to lay out. And hopefully if we agree on at least some of the sort of ideas that are up here, then we can work on making those happen by next release, by Boron release. So the first sort of idea that I had, and that we've kind of kicked around a lot in integration test and other places, is to have each stable feature produce relevant metrics to sort of the users and the industry in general. I think one of the problems we have with our current metrics that we have in CI and that are available is that they're hard to interpret. I don't know if anybody here can sort of succinctly explain to me what OpenDaylight OpenFlow plugin performance is like, or how well does OVSDB scale, or how well do other projects do what they need to do. If we can't succinctly explain it to each other easily here, we can't expect people who are users or the industry to be able to do that either. And so I think we need to sort of converge on a way to do that. So one of the thoughts that at least I looked at, and I'm hopeful to get some feedback on, is we have apples to apples comparisons. This is a bit difficult, but there are other controllers out there, and they do some of the same things that OpenDaylight does. Is there a way to come up with sort of testing or use cases that allow us to sort of compare what we can do versus other controllers? Are there any thoughts or ideas about whether or not that's a good idea?
I think it's absolutely critical. I think it's not just a good idea. I think story-wise, for being able to tell a coherent story about our performance, that's the view people want.
Do we have a mic that we can pass around? Just in case we want to get that on. Is it out here someplace? Okay.
You unmute this one? There we go. All right. Yeah, so for the recording, I was saying that I think that's absolutely critical. I think that's a request that I've heard from tons of different places especially as we lead up to this release, and that's the format people want. They want it in the performance numbers in terms of a comparison. Yeah.
Are there any dissenting votes or people who think that's not a good idea? Okay. Well, it seems like, at least in general, people, I think, are for that idea, the idea that we could measure ourselves easily against sort of a competitor.
Wow, people are really excited about that idea, which I think you should be. We would love people to help with that effort because it's a multi-pronged thing, right? Like as Marcus has talked about a second ago, there's a bunch of different types of performance and it's all nuanced. And so, we could get Lori, who's specialized in list performance or something, right, to maybe figure out some sort of way to compare. And then Jan, who's specialized in OpenFlow performance or something. So your individual projects and the things you care about, we need apples to apples comparisons for. And so we can help with that from an integration perspective, but we need others working on it too.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. I have a slide like how do we get there, and part of it is working directly with people in the projects, developers, and other people and users actually. But we'll get to that in just a second. But the other is release to release. Do we actually have a reasonable way to go from OpenFlow plugin can push this amount of flows and Helium, and then OpenFlow plugin Beryllium, can they push that amount of flows? And do we have sort of historical ways to and so like the progress we're making, because we are making progress, things are getting better as far as what we're able to do, the scale, and sort of the performance and other aspects. So I imagine most of these things sound great, and so I don't see anybody who has sort of comments about it. But
well, I have one comment about it. So I think there's at least two types of sort of release to release metrics that we could gather, right? So right now we have a lot of perf tests running in CI, and so that's not release to release, but it's more continuous. But they're also, because they're running in CI, running in our cloud environment on VMs, and so they're not getting us max numbers. They're not meant to get us max numbers. They're meant to track regressions. So that's a type of thing that we already have here. Another type of thing that I think maybe what Marcus means is more of a sort of like, here's our white paper at the end of Beryllium, and these are the numbers that we've really run against serious hardware, and like it has a low standard deviation. These are serious numbers.
That wasn't an advertisement. Sorry.
Actually, doing that release to release. Yeah, so I just wanted to tease out the difference between those two.
That's essentially what I mean, is that we have sort of a release report at the end of a release, and we talk about the things we're excited about for OpenDaylight. We talk about the improvements we've made and show some sort of difference between last release and this release, but less so, yeah. I agree with what Daniel said, essentially. And the last thing I think as part of this sort of conversation is permanent store of metrics. We've had a lot of these conversations. We just had, like an hour ago, the int test people met, and we had a lot of the same sort of conversations. But I really think that we need sort of historical numbers. We need to store if we're testing things, especially in CI, we should be storing those numbers someplace so that we can do analysis on it. We can tell what's happened over time. And we can tell that story as well, because I think that's a super important thing to get out to the industry, the progress we're making over time.
I'm looking at Andy and Ton in the background. Is there some switch we can just toggle to make that happen, like in a quick patch? Have an infinite storage of all this stuff? Andy says, yeah, it's called lots of money.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, we don't want to store the results of every test, especially like verified tests and certain, But there are some tests where we're getting sort of the performance numbers, and usually there's not even that much data. It's a relatively small amount of data, so I don't think it would be terribly hard to sort of store those. We just have to do the work to get it there and put them in a place where people can access them. But so the next piece, and it's more what the thing that Daniel was referencing, which is a sort of a white paper at the end of a release where we talk about the metrics, and I think that one of the ways I think is really helpful to look at this and think about it is to do each stable or mature feature. Now, I know we've been talking a lot about stable and mature, and we haven't quite got there. And go ahead.
Continue. I wanted to talk about, do you guys want, not want to, are you guys going to use some kind of a hardware kind of test tools like Ixia or something like that?
We have access to that stuff in our Intel lab, and I know that there are other places that we can have access to equipment like that. So we could do a lot of work in that space. I did some investigation of it about 6 months ago, and I couldn't get, at least Ixia's, they have an OpenFlow test suite. I couldn't get their emulated switches to connect to OpenDaylight at the time, and so I was having an issue with that part of it, and I haven't spent too much work working on it since then, but it's a good idea, and I think we could do a lot of testing with it. Yeah. But I think that there's some work there that needs to happen.
Yeah, I would also just point out for people who don't follow integration test meetings as closely, we've have worked with the Spirent folks for a pretty long time historically. They're gone now, but they showed up and they raised lots of issues on our Trello board, and they took some cycles from us, but they didn't really contribute that much back. We didn't really get that much benefit from it. So we've attempted sort of partnerships in that space before, and I think we would try it again. We would just hope that they're actually doing more work for us than we're doing for them.
Yeah, we're definitely open to working with various companies that do testing tools and also who actually do testing themselves. And yeah, we can talk more about that, but it's a good conversation to have. So I know that we haven't actually got to stable or mature features yet, but I think once we continue on that road where we say these are the sort of things that need to happen for a feature to become a stable feature or a mature project, or I think we need to include this sort of testing into that conversation, because if we don't, it doesn't matter if we say we can do all these lovely things, if a user or the industry can't actually be able to intelligibly know what will happen when they take our solution and put it into their network, then they're not going to use the solution. So I mean, it's a problematic thing that we're sort of not covering, and Neither talked a bit about this yesterday morning, where more of the questions are how can I use this in my network rather than can it do this thing? And we're going to continue to get those questions until we start answering and making this information more intelligible to people outside of our community. And I think that having a per release, sort of a white paper, similar vein of what Daniel was talking about, with some analysis and some comparisons of use cases and so on, as it says here, would be a really helpful thing. It's a lot of work, and obviously somebody has to do the work. And I'm not opposed to working on it, but I think there has to be help, obviously. So,
I have some good news about a point you just made involving stable features. It is actually currently a requirement of stable features to have at least one of a functionality, cluster compatibility, scalability, performance, longevity/stability test case.
This is the third slide I was going to get to, but I actually put that
Right,
yeah,
one of each of those.
And
Yes.
I was going to mention that as well, but it's not currently something that happens. And I know that JMO and other people from Intcrest are constantly, I guess I would say, piqued by the fact that things aren't happening that are sort of part of the requirements that need to happen. So
Yeah, well, so this is not the same thing as that, right? So there is no current stable features, and so no one's obliged to follow this.
oh, okay, so it's a bit separate, but it's
Yeah, it's a different thing around projects not actually doing the system test they said they're supposed to do, and that is bad.
But I think the idea was that we were moving towards stable features, and so we were requiring these things. In the future, they might be sort of a hard requirement. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And hopefully we'll have stable features in the Boron cycle, probably starting with our kernel projects, because they are mature projects, or can be mature projects, fairly easily, and they wouldn't have features that depend on non-stable features, which is another requirement of stable features. So I don't know who we have from kernel projects in here, but we're looking very hard at you to start driving this, your features have scalability, your features have performance tests.
So, not that many people are, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, again. So the stable features, is that something that going to be blessed by the integration test group, or is it, I mean, how do we want to be doing that?
I think we've never done this before, so I think we'll kind of make it up as we go, but I'm quite sure that it'll go along the lines of TSC gets a request for a feature to be promoted to stable, integration is then pinged about it or sees that mailing list thread and goes and reviews their test setup and creates some maybe email to the TSC list reviewing their current tests and either blessing them or not as meeting these requirements. So I see it probably progressing that way.
Yeah, and feel free to jump in if people have questions or thoughts.
I can walk
or
this mic
concerns.
around too.
It's not just a conversation between Daniel and I, so just to...
We've got Abhijit too.
Yeah. Anyways, so to get back to the list of things I wanted to talk about, so one of the other things I think would be super helpful, and we talked about this just now in integration test, JMO brought it up, we've talked about it, Luis has brought it up in the past, we've talked about it ad nauseum, because we think it's a good thing to do, not only for sort of system tests, which when things fail, we should have sort of a place people can look to see what's happening with their projects. But also, and I think what I'm focused on in particular is S3P dashboard. So the idea was you would have a page you'd go to and you could actually see all the metrics that are running in CI, and you would see what happens when they're updated, usually on a weekly or a daily basis based on how the tests are run. And we had a brief conversation at the end of the test session where there's a possibility to maybe add physical resources into the CI environment so that we can actually do stability and scale and performance testing in a way that's more canonical, I guess I would say, a way that's more useful. And then we could upload those results to this dashboard, and then you could have a line that says these are the most recent tests that we did on real hardware, and then you have the other ones that are sort of pretty constantly getting updated that talk about what's happening in CI. And so there's actually I wanted to real quick jump to the next slide. There's an example of how this is working in another project in OPNFV called the Yardstick Dashboard. They use something called Grafana, and essentially they pipe all their results from their CI environment into this tool. And I can show you briefly, if I get out of this present mode, what that looks like. So this is basically their dashboard here. And if you look at, say, they haven't actually filled out a lot of they're still in the process of making this work, but if you look at one of the projects that would be reporting results, you can go in and you can click on various metrics, you can see what happened at a certain time. I think something like this, especially leveraging an existing open source project and then just feeding the results we already have from test CI into this, I think would be the sort of the way we should be moving. But like I said, this is another idea that I think would make these sorts of numbers and the things that we're doing currently and the things we're going to be doing in the future more digestible to people outside of basically the development group, the people who are testing, OpenDaylight community itself.
And we're not just hand-waving about this. George has an intern that he is generously re-gifted, basically, to the integration team. He was going to be working on a different dashboard, but now I think he's going to work on this dashboard. So that starts.
Is George here?
Yeah, I don't see him in the room. But that starts in May. No, I think May is when the internships start, and so it's going to be a little bit before they get that done. But
yeah, so we could have people working on this. We can always use help, obviously, and obviously I wanted to make sure that we had a conversation about whether or not this is useful. It seemed like in the integration test session, people were pretty excited about it. People are not so much excited about it here, but that's okay. Yeah, it's right after lunch, exactly. Okay, and the last sort of part of this slide was to have a goal where we do a cross-project coordination on scale, stability, perf, and the integration test project. I know we've sort of been focusing our efforts there already. We kind of have a core group of people who have been doing work on this same issue. Problem is we need to pull in people from all the projects that are actually putting the features together and actually putting the use cases together that people want to use in order to first get valid tests that I think would be easily digestible by the industry and by users outside of OpenDaylight. And then the second, because we don't have unlimited resources, we need people to help actually do the work. So I think we focus on integration tests. We can do some work to help jumpstart that, and I think we actually had a brief conversation about this in the integration test meeting where we can do some work to where we can put together like frameworks that allow other people to sort of do things faster. Luis has an intern that's doing a longevity sort of a bit of a framework that allow people to easily make longevity tests. And so I think the more work we do there, I think the better off we are, but I think that's essentially what we need to move towards. So how do we get to these?
Just if I could interrupt, I think the release by release performance numbers, it would fit perfectly in docs, right? So it should be somebody's end of the release job to go get all the numbers we did last release plus any new ones that we've decided to do, and then documentation is a perfect place for it.
Put release numbers in documentation.
Right.
Sure.
I think there was a question over here too. Oh. Let me get the mic to you so it's recorded. Sorry.
Can you share the kind of scale tests you've been doing on the ODL? Anything?
Well, Yeah, I mean, I can share what we have in CI right now. I can share sort of what I've been working on for OVSDB. For general consumption, I don't know. I guess we can take a look real quick. But essentially, the scale tests, and I think I can find it really quickly if I go to this page here. And is that something that you did, Luis? That test? For the scale test for OpenFlow? The one we have right now for OpenFlow is a scale test. Yeah. So these are 3 or what, 4. There's a couple for links that were actually done by another person a couple cycles ago. And then there's these 2 max switches. So currently there's a mininet test that runs, and maybe he's a better person to talk about it actually. Is there a mic for? Thanks, Daniel.
Yeah, so we have all this sample of tests that is being done during continuous integration. Most of the tests today is OpenFlow tests. Like the first set of tests is the southbound cbench test that we are doing. The second is end-to-end performance, where there what we are doing is using a northbound scripts to load the switches with flows. And then we make sure that these flows get programmed in the southbound devices. And then the last one is topology scale is one test to scale switches and the other one is to scale links. This is what we are doing. Of course, this is all in a CI environment, so especially in the scalability test, what we do is to just stop. Not stop because this is the maximum, stop because we don't want to test more because it's enough for the kind of VM that we are testing here. So it's not, you should not see as a maximum kind of level test, but mostly to regression. This is why most of the tests are here written to detect regression in case there's some patch or some change, go and change the performance in the wrong way. So, any question in particular on any of these tests or? Yes.
Do we have? Okay.
Hey, so I'm recently running some scalability test against OVS, and I believe the CSIT test using scalability test in the infra is against an old version of OVS.
So today in the OpenDaylight infrastructure we have 2 versions of OVS. The classic image Ubuntu 14.04 has OVS 2.0, kind of old, and then we have a new VM Ubuntu 2.3, OVS 2.3. OVS 2.4 is something that we wanted to leverage, but we have some issues today in the OpenFlow plugin. No issues, but some kind of logging is happening when you connect an OVS 2.4 in the OpenFlow Java project. And because of that, we haven't leveraged this component yet but very soon we will see 2.4 as well.
Okay.
Or 2.5, I mean, probably 2.5, yeah.
Yeah, I'm aware about the logging thing, but so I have personally run some scalability tests against 2.4 and 2.5 and 2.3, and the results are really different from 2.3 and 2.4 plus, I would say, version of OVS. Okay, bottom line, maybe I can help set up the whole test for those new version of OVS.
Yeah. I think I saw your mail somewhere where you were saying that there was issues with 2.4. Unfortunately, we cannot reproduce these issues today because the fact that we don't have a 2.4 image today.
Yes, absolutely. So this is why I'm really willing to help set up this new test, and because my result so far is with OVS 2.3 or below, you can scale up to 400 switch connected, and with 2.4 or newer, like at 50 switches, it starts crashing. So yeah, there is a big concern here. And
so
this is why.
Is that using Mininet as the tool? Yeah.
So no, it's using Docker containers.
Okay.
So yeah,
Sure.
the OVS is running in Docker containers, and we're well, in my test, I'm connecting Docker to OpenDaylight.
Yeah, I have a similar test that I've been working on for OVSDB, but it's yeah. I think I saw your patch. I think that's good work, and we'd be happy to have you help out. So I mean,
I haven't committed any patch for that. I've just in the mailing list.
You pushed the patch on scale. I don't know. Was it not for OVS?
Yeah,
that was for Mininet, or?
I have a draft patch, but that was just to push the scalability test in the CSIT job.
Sure. Okay.
But in the CSIT job, it does scale up to like 1K switches. because it's 2.0.
So important thing is also to open a bug, so we can track this in the. My friend here kind of call.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, open a bug, maybe we can. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, open the bug.
Yeah, actually, another point I was going to make, and it's probably in this slide someplace, but a lot of this testing is going to be stuff that's not conducive to running in CI, but that doesn't mean I don't think we shouldn't host some of the code in OpenDaylight. Like the idea would be that if you can get tests running, they're local only tests, but you give access to them to everyone else who wants to run that test, rather than have them sort of, locally by yourself. And then also people can help review and give you feedback on whether or not that test is good or not. So I'm actually of the opinion, and I don't know about the rest of the guys from IntTest, that we should start pushing those tests up so that we can actually, base them on the robot and have them similar formats to what we're already using. But if we can push those tests up, then we can actually get more people helping run the tests and get information. Oops.
But Marcus, I think sometimes it might be okay with to also just have the results somewhere. As opposed to,
I don't mind people putting the results either. I'm just encouraging people to submit code that actually helps other people run the results too. Because in a scientific setting, you would want other people to be able to reproduce what your results are, right? So I mean, you want the test and the results, but if you're only going to give us the results, I'll take those too.
Along with the documentation about how you tested, and this is the test environment.
Sure, I'd agree with that.
Performance and scaling, there are two distinct areas. One is the lab performance and one is the real in commercial deployment. So I would be interested to know in the commercial deployment if anyone has deployed the real system and what is the scaling limit they have hit.
I'd be really interested in that too.
No,
I think this is
but
the kind
we want the real statistics.
This is all aligned to your white paper thing, right? Like every release, not every day, but every release at least we should come out with some white paper with some numbers. At least for those results we get in a close to near production environment, like could be the Intel lab or some of this environment, not just the CI environment.
Sure.
So the idea is there, but not today. I don't think I have this.
It dovetails back to something else I wanted to talk about, which is that we have these user groups that are supposed to be giving input on OpenDaylight, who actually are people who are supposed to be using it as well. And I think we need to get a funnel for the information they get when they actually deploy this into whatever their environments are, and funnel that information back and give us a more real-life sort of information about how OpenDaylight scales, performs, and so on in various use cases.
So has there been any commercial deployments?
Yeah, but I'm not the expert on that part of it, but there
I
have
think
been.
there are.
Yeah.
I mean, Ericsson, we have a commercial deployment. I don't know about the tests and all those things. I think Rocket also probably has it. Cisco.
I know there are commercial deployments. I know that.
Yeah, Neil has got a list of like 100 deployments, but I've never heard anyone give us feedback about performance. That would be cool though.
Or scale, or like stability. Right. But I think since we have that group of people that we've gathered them as people to contribute back to OpenDaylight, I think we need to start using them in this capacity, as asking specifically about these sorts of issues, getting feedback, and then incorporating that back into how we're doing our work, whether it's testing or whether it's developing the actual product itself.
Yeah, we've been running some trial in our lab on the actual product. So we kind of have 6 devices, 6 switches, OVS switches, talking to the controller. It's about 8 gig. So the CPU utilization is really spiking up. I mean, like up to 40%.
When is this?
And OpenFlow is not enabled on these devices by default. So just wondering, what's causing the CPU spike? I mean, just ODL running in the background.
So you're saying that when ODL is running and you connect the 6 devices, ODL's CPU spikes?
To 40%, yeah.
40%, and how are you connecting them?
It's through OVSDB 6.
Okay.
So I would be interested to if you have any numbers on the OVSDB, itself. in terms of scaling? I mean, how many switches, I mean, you're able to?
I've gotten up, I'm running a test right now in the Intel labs that's using Docker. I've gotten up to some 300 and some odd switches, but then it breaks, but it's not, I don't think it has to do with, OpenDaylight doesn't break, my test breaks, but I don't, so I haven't got to the max scale limit, but I'm not seeing the same issues that you are. Although I'm using OVS Docker containers 2.3.2 and 2.4, and so.
Would you mind filing a bug for us?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Yeah, I know the guys. I'll get them to fix it.
No, it may not be actually just the OVS DB. So what's happening is, so the network module by default, it's actually installing the BR int and opening the OpenFlow channel. So that seems to be sending a lot of chatty traffic. So even though we are not using it, so I don't know if that is the only reason, but I mean, we are investigating right now. So I think we'll have something to report maybe in a few days. So.
I know there's at least one OVS, or there's a few OVS DB committers here, so I'm sure that they heard what you said, and maybe we'll investigate. I don't know. Thank you. So I'm glad we're having some conversation, because I didn't want to just throw a bunch of information at you and have everyone go home. And but to get back to sort of how I think we get there, we have to have projects help develop, I think, meaningful metrics that the industry can use and that users can use. Oftentimes we do things like max flows per second and sort of data center transactions and things, not data center, data store transactions and things of that sort. But I'm wondering if like an OpenStack user who wants to take OpenDaylight and use it as a networking component, the network component for OpenStack, but they don't know anything about OpenDaylight or in general OpenFlow or things of that sort. What can we tell them in order to have them understand what OpenDaylight can do for them in this situation? Like, that's in maybe an OpenStack language, or how many networks can you bring up in OpenStack? How many floating IPs can you use, or things of that sort. I think that if we can not move away from the sort of metrics where they're sort of like internally meaningful to us, but I think we should start creating new metrics that are meaningful outside of the community. And the only way we can do that is by the people who are coming up with the use cases and implementing them, to think sort of a little bit more deeply about how to describe that to people who they want to use their product. So I think that that's what this first point is, that we need to work with developers and the user base, especially the people who are in the NELA's like user advisory group or so on. How do we like describe things in OpenDaylight in a way that's helpful for people to want to adopt it and to get the information they need to want to deploy it to their networks?
Yeah, I would point out that some of that is the goal of, as you know, is the goal of CPerf. I'm saying this for people, not Marcus. But are you going to talk about this? All right.
Yeah, I was going to briefly bring it up because we're doing some of this work in an OPNFV project called CPerf. It's Control Performance Testing Project. It's a subset of a few of the people who work in integration tests right now on scale issues, scale, stability, performance, and so on. So I think that's good work, and I think that those are some of the things that OPNFV is doing. But obviously, I think...
And I would specifically highlight that the OPNFV community has a lot of people from academic backgrounds who have been thinking and writing white papers about metrics, specifically metrics in these situations for years now. So they've just put a huge amount of thought into this already. So we're working with a guy named Al Morton, who's written, you've probably seen his name on various white papers, written a lot of white papers in this space, to make sure that the work that the industry has thought about in that historic vein is getting funneled into our current dev work in OPNFV. So it's meant to be sort of a meeting of those two communities. I would encourage others, which I get a sense maybe that's relevant to some of you, to jump in there if you can.
Yeah, completely agree with Daniel.
Yeah, and also, I mean, we would like to collaborate and we would like to leverage some of the work you have done in the OVS DB scaling. So what would be the best place to start? I mean,
yeah, we can talk after the presentation and hopefully start a thread or something on one of the listservs. And yeah, I'd love to collaborate, so we can talk later. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think we have to work with projects to sort of get the relevant use cases and features and sort of metrics to help define them. And we need to put some urgency towards that so that then we can start developing sort of tests that allow you to explain the metrics, how are actually our solutions, how they actually perform underneath those metrics. And so that's essentially the top two parts. Does anyone have any thoughts or comments about this sort of idea? Does anyone think it's possible? All the developers sitting in the audience, do you guys think it's even, do you not have time to do it, or is there any sort of feedback? No? No one? Okay, well, it's a suggestion. I think that we'll definitely see, going forward, I'll try and organize something of this nature, and then we'll see if we can get people to participate and get some more interesting ways to describe the features that we're putting together and that OpenDaylight allow. So I was going to sort of go into this idea that a stable feature requires, these sort of tests already, but obviously we don't have any stable features yet. So that's something I think in the future that we should look at closely, is making sure that we have these sorts of tests and metrics for stable features. The last part is I think that we need to push most of our tests upstream. This just kind of ties into some of the other things where I was saying, if you have tests you're running offline, it'd be great if you could push those up so that we could host them, obviously. Now, there's problematic parts of that if your tests don't conform with what we do and how our testing is set up and so on. But from what I've heard, there's a lot of testing of OpenDaylight that's happening in various companies, but it's not being shared back with the community here. And we need to start getting that information, and we need that feedback loop to start happening, whether it's the tests themselves or the metrics themselves, because it's important for us to continue to push forward and show what OpenDaylight can do. We can't do it without these sorts of numbers. So I would encourage people in the audience, if you do have those internal numbers, if you have internal metrics and things, tests that you've run, try and share those back with the community.
So there are some tests already upstream that you could pull locally and run on bare metal hardware with parameters that'll let it run for days or weeks, or faster or more switches. So we've written some tests already upstream that you can take and do with what you want. And if you want to improve it and push it back, we'd appreciate it. And if you want to give us a new test that we can expand or reduce to run in CI, it would be great.
Sure. And I just want to say that, like, if we don't, I guess, do a better job in this space, we're going to be defined by other people. Right now there are tests out there, like Cbench, for example, that if you run it against us and then you run it against some other unnamed controllers, we look really bad. And the reason is, it's not because it's a valid test, or it's not because that may actually be how things perform, but because we haven't really defined ourselves what OpenDaylight can do in a way that's intelligible to people. And that thing is just out there, and people are using it, and they're putting those numbers up, and so it's defining us for ourselves. And unless we start to get our own numbers and we start to define how we want to be seen outside of OpenDaylight's community, then that's going to happen. So that's, at least for me, it's problematic. So I was going to go through quickly sort of this is something that I put together for OVSDB project, but it was kind of just an example of what I think needs to happen for projects in general, is that somebody has to come in and figure out how to actually do that scaling and stability and performance work in a project. And sort of these are just some ideas about how I wanted to do it. I want to do it in OVSDB scale, or OVSDB. I'm actually doing some of this stuff already, but the idea is that there are two things I think that you can do. You can have sort of reports or results that you can push upstream, or you can have actually upstream tests running in CI, and if we get it in the future, sort of the real hardware in CI. I think that you want to push the tests upstream first. You can pull those down. Basically what Jamo was saying a second ago is that you can pull them down and run them as one-off tests in a lab. And so you have that sort of ability to push the limits of scale and performance and other things using the tests we already have in the lab and then report the results. That's currently what I'm trying to do with the OVSDB scale test I have I haven't been able to get it to run successfully in the CI because of various limitations. So I'm trying to run it in the lab in a way that's helpful. And then I think there needs to be a plan for each project on how to improve, performance, scale, and so on. I know OVSDB has one. I know that OpenFlow plugin has one. I don't know if this is something that happens across every project. I'm sure that it's something people care about, but I think that that's reasonable. And then I have a list of tests, and I'm not going to go through these tests in general, but I think that we need to start as different projects who have stable features. We need to start coming up with tests of at least ideas of which tests we want to run. I'd rather have a wiki that has tests that you should be running against a project, but not have the tests and not have anything. Because maybe there's somebody who will come along and implement the test if they know what needs to be tested. Right now, if somebody's coming into the community and they want to help out, sometimes there's not a place to go, hey, go do that. It's relatively easy, it's well-defined, and you can do it. And I think that's the way that maybe we can get more of this work done, by at least defining what needs to happen for those projects. And then I was going to talk briefly about OPNFV CPerf. We touched on it briefly already, but it's a project that we recently set up. Daniel's the PTL of it, and a lot of the committers on test and myself are committers on this project. And our scope is to basically run performance tests on SDN controllers and realistic large automated deployments. And so all of the things I'm talking about and that people in the room have said they wanted to see, we're trying to do a lot of that work in this place. One reason, because they have hardware we can use. Another reason, the NFV use cases match up really well with the idea of testing in this way. But the project's currently in the ramp stage, and we're aiming to pull in a lot of the work that we've already done in ODL and expand from there. So we'd love it if people came and helped out and jumped on that bandwagon. But I'm hopeful that the other things we talked about are also things that are interesting to people, and that maybe we can move forward on trying to work towards sort of some of these things that I've suggested. That's basically all I have. If people have questions or conversations that they want to, I don't know. One over here. Can somebody give a mic over this way? Mic over this way? Yeah.
Who was it that needs it?
Yeah, it's very important work. I wonder whether we have any goals in mind. For example, is that 500 switches is what we want to support, or 1,000 or 10,000? Do we have any goal in mind?
Well, I was going to say these are all goals right here, but I understand, I take your point. No, I don't think that anyone's defined that yet. I think it'd probably be useful in the long run, but I don't know, do the people from OpenFlow plugin, do they know how many switches they want to support eventually? I mean, it seems, yeah, you do. He's nodding, yeah.
So certainly
But,
you can always improve. Doing measurement is probably the first step, right? But also, I think it would be more effective. You have some
goal.
Yeah, certain goals.
Yeah, we've talked about this in the past, actually, that have certain scale targets, performance targets, etc.
Yeah, normally where that conversation goes is that we just aren't getting feedback from users about what they need, where we can just make up numbers ourselves, but we need users who are running into issues and in fact want this particular metric to get to this value. And we've never had that, as Marcus has said, that pipeline of information isn't making it to us.
Yeah, certainly it's really important that we get feedback from the people using it. Or
Do you expect that the OPNFV project will provide that feedback?
Do I expect if OPNFV will provide that feedback? I don't know. I think maybe. I mean, they're going to at least be doing big automated deployments that consume OpenDaylight, and so if they don't work, then that's a metric that's important.
Fine-tune that question in the next cycle, right? In the C release of OPNFV.
Yeah, I expect in the C release that they'll finally get their, so most of OPNFV's work so far has been getting installer projects that can actually lay down this complicated infrastructure. And their test projects have had a hard time because they haven't been able to work with anything. There's no thing to run against. They have gotten a lot of the foundation done at the end of the B release for the test projects, and I think they're in a decent place now to start C release and really make a lot of progress on it. So I guess I am fairly optimistic about getting a pretty decent pipeline of information coming back from the family of testing projects in OPNFV. That started to some extent already. Like we have a decent relationship with Anna, forgot her last name, from upstream, and Fatih from upstream OPNFV, Frank Bonkers from upstream OPNFV. So those people are pinging our mailing list, are giving us bug reports, are, you know, those communities are starting to work together more closely, their test community and our test community. So yeah, I think that's going to happen some, and I think it's going to happen a lot more in the C release. So I guess overall, yeah, I'm optimistic about that.
Keep going on, yeah. So, and can we use the OPNFV test framework to run tests?
Yeah, like that's the point of CPerf, is that we're going to use the installers and the hardware that OPNFV is creating, and then their test harnesses, to the func test harnesses and stuff, to run OpenDaylight's performance tests from starting with what we have upstream, and then as community members come and contribute to CPerf and bring tests, like this guy Nikos from Intercom Telco is doing a really good job with a tool that they've created called Instat, and I could ramble about it for a while if you want, but you know, he's brought a test tool to us, and we are experts in CI, and we have this OPNFV CI that we can use, and so the combination of those three things is going to end up running a pretty cool tool in CI regularly against OpenDaylight in a realistic environment. And so, yes, is the short answer.
Do you have any coverage on high availability in this framework?
Availability. Do you mean like uptime or stability?
I mean, you have a cluster kind of setup, and then where?
I'm not terribly familiar with the cluster coverage yet, but I think Luis is probably a better person to.
Yeah, so today we have at least 4, I think, tests covering basic cluster HA functionality. One is OpenFlow, another is OBSDB, another is netconf, and I think there is a BGP on the pipe. Yeah, so today is very basic. Basically, what we are doing is just connect a device to just 3 instances, and then take down the owner of the instance itself, and then see that everything works. And I can say the system test results show that, yeah, the feature is there, but we need to work a little bit on the stability. Like we still seen some peaks situation where it doesn't work all the way. The kind of stability we're looking for, like never fails, yeah, it's not there yet. But we are working on that, and the test is there. And once this test gets stable, which is what we need to do quickly, we're going to be adding more tests, because cluster is huge. Any other question?
Yeah, and I think in the future we'd probably expand sort of our existing, the ones we have, the S3P tests we already have, to clustered versions to allow us to sort of get the metrics there as well.
Yeah. There is one I forgot to mention. There is a cluster test for just the controller piece of it, the data store replication. So that one is getting now refactor. Like it used to have not stable in the past, but mostly also because the tests were written not stable or not very good. So now we are refactoring that test as well.
Oh, is it time? Okay. Looks like it's time to go, so thanks everyone. I appreciate it. Hello. Hi everybody. It's 1:30, so it's probably time I should at least start talking. My name is Marcus Williams. I work on Intel's OpenDaylight SDN team. And I'm going to talk about OpenDaylight S3P today, which is basically scale, security, stability, and performance. It wasn't until about a week ago that I planned on doing this based on a few people's gentle persuasion. And so what I planned, and it might be a little bit misleading because of what the session talks about, but I don't plan on going through a bunch of results. In fact, some of the results I would do, OVSDB results, I'm sure some of those guys want to hear some numbers there. Not quite finished yet. But there are some results that are in OpenDaylight CI that we all sort of know about. We've done a lot of testing. So one of the thoughts that at least I looked at, and I'm hopeful to get some feedback on, is we have apples-to-apples comparisons. This is a bit difficult, but there are other controllers out there, and they do some of the same things that OpenDaylight does. Is there a way to come up with sort of testing or use cases that allow us to sort of compare what we can do versus other controllers? Are there any thoughts or ideas about whether or not that's a good idea?
I think it's absolutely critical. I think it's not just a good idea. I think story-wise, as far as being able to tell a coherent story about our performance, that's the view people want.
Do we have a mic that we can pass around? Just in case we want to get that on. Is it out here someplace? Okay.
You unmute this one? There we go. All right. Yeah, so for the recording, I was saying that I think that's absolutely critical. I think that's a request that I've heard from tons of different places especially as we lead up to this release.
And hopefully if we agree on at least some of the sort of ideas that are up here, then we can work on making those happen by next release, by boron release. So the first sort of idea that I had, and that we've kind of kicked around a lot in integration test and other places, is to have each stable feature produce relevant metrics to sort of the users and the industry in general. I think one of the problems we have with our current metrics that we have in CI and that are available is that they're hard to interpret. I don't know if anybody here can sort of succinctly explain to me what OpenDaylight OpenFlow plugin performance is like, or how well does OVSDB scale, or how well do other projects do what they need to do. If we can't succinctly explain it to each other easily here, we can't expect people who are users or the industry to be able to do that either. And so I think we need to sort of converge on a way to do that, improving our testing over the last, I guess, 6 months since the last release. However, I want to have a conversation more on where we're going in the community as far as S3P, sort of what we want to do, and I have a bunch of ideas that I'd like to have some discussion on. So I'll go ahead and get started here, but that's basically where I'm at. So these are some proposed sort of goals for the community. First is like a work group. We've talked about this in integration tests quite a bit, but the idea that we would come together, and not just people who are doing test work, because there's a very small portion of people who are in the test group and who are actually doing the work, but we actually need the community as a whole to sort of fill in some of the gaps as far as coming and helping decide what needs to be tested, and possibly helping define tests and actually create the tests themselves. But I think we need to create sort of a work group where we meet every other week or something along those lines, where we talk about these issues that I'm going to lay out.
And that's the format people want. They want the performance numbers in terms of a comparison. Yeah.
Are there any dissenting votes or people who think that's not a good idea? Okay. Well, it seems like, at least in general, people, I think, are for that idea, the idea that we could measure ourselves easily against sort of a competitor.
Wow, people are really excited about that idea, which I think you should be. We would love people to help with that effort, because it's a multi-pronged thing, right? Like as Marcus has talked about a second ago, there's a bunch of different types of performance, and it's all nuanced. And so, we could get Lori, who's specialized in list performance or something, right, to maybe figure out some sort of way to compare, and then Jan, who's specialized in OpenFlow performance or something. So your individual projects and the things you care about, we need apples to apples comparisons for. And so we can help with that from an integration perspective, but we need others working on it too.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. I have a slide like how do we get there, and part of it is working directly with people in the projects, the developers, and other people. And